Jim Rickards, he is the MoneyGPT author, strategic intelligence editor. He's a guy who historically has been calling all the big ones, all of the big disruptions in our society, in our economy. And Jim, I've heard you be pessimistic. I don't think I've heard a more stern warning than the one you're giving right now.
Well, thanks, Glenn. It's great to be with you. I don't think of myself as a pessimist. I am an analyst, and I just try to be realistic.
Right.
So if that is kind of bad news, so be it. But I try to have a lot of readers and followers and so forth, and listeners on our show today, and I just try to get it right. But I am looking at the election. Of course, everyone is that coming up November 5th. I remind people the election's pretty much over already with the early voting and all that, so we know that, and the drop boxes and the mail-ins. So people understand that, but we'll get to November 5th. I don't think we'll know on November 5th or even that night or early the next day. You've got the usual trouble spots, Philadelphia, Maricopa County. I don't know what's going on in Arizona, but they seem to ship the ballots off to a warehouse. But beyond that, most Americans are not familiar with the actual electoral calendar, so to speak. And it was devised in the late 18th century. And people say, well, why does it take from November 5th to January 6th, 2025 to figure things out? Well, back in the 18th century, they got around by horses and carriage and all that, and it just took time. But anyway, when you get past that, let's just say Trump wins. Now, that's not a sure thing. It's going to be a close election, but my models show Trump winning. So he gets more than 270 electoral votes. So we come up to December 17th when they actually count those votes in the state capitals, and there are going to be disputes and litigation. But let's say we make it, I'm just kind of looking ahead as far as we can, to January 6, 2025. Now, everyone's spun up about January 6, 2021. We know what happened. But this is January 6, 2025. Those electoral votes go to the House and the Senate. Now, here's the key. And this is why Trump's campaigning in places like New York and California. He's not going to win New York or California, but they're fighting over House seats. Because if the Democrats take a majority of the House of Representatives, which is possible, there are only a 4 or 5 vote difference right now, led by James Raskin, they're going to pass a resolution saying that Trump is an insurrectionist under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Now, a lot of people say, wait a second, didn't the Supreme Court throw that out? Not exactly. Colorado and Maine tried to kick Trump off the ballot on that ground. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said states cannot do it. So Colorado and Maine couldn't do it, nor could any other state. But they explicitly said the Congress could. And it was a federal issue, exactly. Yeah. So now you pass this resolution, what happens? Trump's votes would be disqualified. Let's say he has 300 electoral votes, and pick a number over 270. Those are disqualified on the grounds that he's an insurrectionist. So then what happens next? Well, now now nobody has 270 because in this scenario, Kamala Harris doesn't get 270. Trump does, but he's disqualified. So now the election goes to the House of Representatives. This, by the way, has happened before 1800, 1824, and then 1876. They still can't figure out what happened, but it has happened before. So, but now you flip over from the 14th Amendment to the 12th Amendment. I should let the listeners know I happen to be a lawyer, so I'm enough of a geek to read all this stuff. Now you're in the 12th Amendment, 1804, and what does that say? Well, the House votes to choose the president, but there are a couple of caveats. One is they can only vote for someone who got in the top 3 electoral votes. And this is, back in the days, maybe 3 or 4 people get electoral votes. George Wallace got electoral votes in 1968. Top 3. But there's only going to be one. If you disqualify Trump, no one else is going to win a state. And Kamala Harris is the only one you could vote for because top 3, but she would be the top one because that's it. Now,
why wouldn't it go to JD Vance? Why doesn't he take those?
Well, I think that's what's going to happen, but you have to sort of follow the 12th Amendment is a playbook. I think that's where it will end up. I agree with that, but you have to kind of look at the sequence. Now, in the House, here's the interesting part. There are 435 members, but you don't vote by member. You vote by state delegation. So Texas would get 1 vote. I live in New Hampshire. We'd get 1 vote, the same as Texas. The Republicans control a majority of the state delegations by a bigger margin. They barely control a majority of the House. But when you go by state delegations, it's more like 28-22. The Republicans have a substantial majority. But the problem is you can only vote for Kamala Harris no matter what because nobody else has any electoral votes. The answer then, and the 12th Amendment says this, is for the Republicans, if they have the cojones, to go out and stand on the mall in the snow, and then the House lacks a quorum. And the 12th Amendment says you can't do anything what we're talking about if you don't have a quorum.
Correct.
So if you lack a quorum, then what happens? The 12th Amendment says the vice president becomes the acting president. Now, J.D. Vance would not suffer this disqualification, going back to the insurrection. So J.D. Vance would become the acting president of the United States if the House lacks a quorum. And I described this, Glenn. It's all in the 12th Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment. Some of this has been litigated in years past. It sounds crazy, but just think about what we've been through the last 3 months. Two, maybe three assassination attempts, a coup d'etat on Joe Biden, a nominee who didn't get one vote in 2 tries, not one vote in a primary. And so there's enough craziness to go around. So, again, I'm just kind of reading the Constitution and applying it. And it has happened before. In, say, 1800, we ended up with Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, who were bitter enemies and opposing parties. But that's what happened. And here you could have Kamala, J.D. Vance, worst case, or J.D. Vance as acting president if the Republicans walk off the floor and they lack a quorum.
Jeez, this is craziness. One of the reasons we are successful, we had cheap energy, don't have that anymore. Right. Well-educated populace, we don't really have that anymore. Cheap labor, we don't have that anymore. And a stable country. If this happens, what happens to the economy?
Well, the stock market, it can there are bull markets and bear markets. It goes up and down. But the one thing the stock market hates is uncertainty.
Right.
What we just described is maximum uncertainty. Because I gave you a scenario. It is laid out in the 12th Amendment, 1804. But you can bet that every step that I described will be litigated in some manner. So, and the courts want nothing to do with this. I mean, you go back to 2020, the New York Times and all these people say, well, there were 15 cases and they were all of them were decided that there was no voter interference and no election fraud. That's not what the court said. The courts dismissed all those cases, right, either on standing, jurisdiction, timeliness. They went to all these procedural things to get rid of the cases, but the actual fraud was never litigated.
Right.
There's been a lot of forensic examinations since then. So, and that's just the courts say, hey, Congress, states, state legislature, you guys figure it out. We don't want to be involved in this. They still feel burned by Bush versus Gore in 2000. Having said that, they have a job to do, and I think these things are going to end up in their lap. But if you put the courts to one side and just go by the playbook in the 12th Amendment, and that was based on what happened in 1800, you would end up with J.D. Vance as acting president.
And because the Congress can say that he's an insurrectionist, you don't need a trial? I mean, he's never even been charged with insurrection.
Of course, you're right, and I agree completely. But that 13th Amendment hasn't been, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, hasn't been litigated since we had the case last summer with Colorado and Maine, but before that you have to go back to the 1930s. Of course, that was designed, that came after the Civil War. It was 1868. It was designed to disqualify Confederates from federal office, et cetera. Over the years, but Section 5, Section 3 is the Insurrections Clause, but Section 5 empowers the Congress to make laws to interpret Section 3. They, sometime, I don't know the exact date, sometime in the 1920s, the Congress granted full amnesty to Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis. They said they were not insurrectionists. And so there has been legislation and it has been litigated, not in recent decades. But if you were willing to cut Robert E. Lee a break, I don't know why they wouldn't do it for Trump.
They did that. They did that to heal. I mean, that's why we have these statues of Robert E. Lee. That the North said, build a statue. These are heroes for you as well. They didn't prosecute these guys because they said we've got to come back together as a nation. Nobody's going to do that this time.
That's exactly right. The bitterness is we're sorry to say that, but it's there. And by the way, the leader of this, and he's open about it. I read the Constitution, did the legal homework, but the guy who says this is what we're going to do is Jamie Raskin, a member of Congress from Maryland. But most people are they're worried about election fraud on November 5th. They should be. I think Larry Trump has done a good job of. I think they've mobilized 500 lawyers, and they're on that. And Republicans are finally waking up to the fact that you may not like mail-ins, but you got to do it. But this is much further down the road. This is the end game. This is the final lawfare attack.